Hi folks, welcome back to the only place where common sense didn't take an early retirement. Now look, I don't know what kind of fever dream America's trapped in right now, but it seems like the left took a wrong turn at equality and landed somewhere between drag nuns and cartel cosplay. We've got progressive pastors out here preaching that convicted wife beaters are saints and that trans activists are being crucified, which I guess makes blue sky the new Golgotha. Somewhere along the way, facts became hate speech and MS-13 got canonized as misunderstood social workers. So buckle up, because today we're diving headfirst into the theological theater, gangland gospel, and moral gymnastics of the modern left, where every criminal is a victim, and every victim better watch their back.
This year, it is very important that we recognize the crucifixion of our trans siblings.
What?
That we recognize how the powers that be have begun to say to our trans siblings that in their passport, they have to have the gender assigned to them at birth.
Oh my God.
Making it dangerous for them to travel. If the gender that they experience is different than the one they were born with. We have to be willing to sit in the shadow of the cross, to witness and stand in solidarity with those who are being crucified. Are we willing to be Senator Chris Van Hollen, get on a plane and go to the concentration camp in El Salvador and demand to see the one who is being crucified, Kilmer Abrego Garcia? And to stay until he can sit at the foot of the cross and bear witness to Abrego's challenges, to his pain, to his crucifixion, because he did nothing wrong.
Now let's make this absolutely clear. This person wearing a pride ornament on their clothing is not a pastor. They are, quite literally, wearing the sin God hates the most, pride, around their neck, as they preach about trans people bearing crosses and crime martyrdom for an MS-13 gang member. Pride, not as a virtue, but as a vice so destructive, it cracked heaven. You can't make this stuff up. They're not even hiding it anymore. It's right in front of you for you to see. Spiritual inversion dressed up in progressive liturgy. So let's be clear, Jocelyn Emerson, this so-called pastor, is not offering a sermon. She's staging a ritual, and the God with a lower G she serves is not the God with a uppercase G that we Christians serve, the God of Scripture. This is political theater masquerading as theology, designed to baptize chaos in a language of compassion. And the audience isn't supposed to think, it's supposed to feel. That's how this ideology spreads. It replaces truth with emotional leverage. It paints criminals as Christ figures and labels moral boundaries as violence. It's not about protecting people anymore. It's about reordering your reality. Now, when a self-proclaimed reverend says that a violent gang member who beat his wife did nothing wrong, when that same gang member was caught on body cam human trafficking, you're not hearing a plea for justice. You're witnessing the collapse of moral language. This is what happens when identity politics overtakes ethics. When you believe that someone's feelings about their gender grant them spiritual immunity, then naturally a convicted abuser becomes a saint as long as he checks the right intersectional boxes. Victimhood becomes virtue, and in that twisted equation, truth is crucified, not the person. This is the logical endpoint of decades of academic poison, media gaslighting, and the slow decay of objective reality. For years, the left has dismantled every stable pillar of meaning, sex, law, family, truth itself, and replaced them with a gods, with a lower G, of self-expression and systemic blame. And now we're here. A woman with a pride-themed clerical collar and a political agenda, comparing a passport dispute to the crucifixion of Christ and a violent felon to the Lamb of God. What we're watching is more than just moral confusion. It's actually strategic. This is how cultural authority is claimed, not by argument, but by redefining sacred terms. Crucifixion no longer means death by torture. It means you got misgendered on your Delta boarding pass. Justice doesn't mean moral accountability. It means ideological alignment. Faith becomes a tool of activism, not obedience. And let's not kid ourselves. This isn't fringe anymore. It's not just some lone lunatic at a rally. This ideology dominates education, legacy media, HR departments all over the country and the world, and the pulpits of dying churches desperate to remain relevant. Emerson's rant isn't an anomaly, it's a template. This is how the modern left builds its moral scaffolding through emotional manipulation, false equivalency, and a theology hollowed out until only slogans remain. But here's the truth. You can't build a society on this level of delusion. You can't sanctify criminals and call it progress. You can't crucify truth and call it compassion, because eventually the weight of all these falsehoods collapses. The spell breaks, and the people who were told that pain is holiness and chaos is justice are left with nothing but ashes and slogans. So no, Reverend Emerson, Kilmar Abrego Garcia is nowhere even near the foot of Christ, as well as everybody else on earth. The cross was not made for those who smuggle humans and beat women. And twisting scripture to fit your ideology doesn't make you a prophet. It makes you a heretic. And the fact that so many cheer while this person preaches tells us everything we need to know about where America's moral compass is truly pointed and just how far off course we've gone. This is the kind of spiritual subversion God warns us about in Scripture. The wolves in shepherd's clothing, twisting his words to serve idols. And make no mistake, he reserves a harshest judgment for them. But it doesn't stop there. The Bible gives us clear patterns. When Israel turned its back on God, embraced perversion, and allowed wickedness to lead its people, it didn't end in revival. It ended in collapse. They were conquered, scattered, and humiliated until they finally repented and returned to him. America is barreling down the same path. If we don't hold the line, if we keep letting demons parade through our institutions wearing pride around their necks and calling it righteousness, we will suffer the same fate. The yoke must be broken, the spell shattered, because though God is with us, he does not bless rebellion. He will not spare a nation that knows better and still chooses to rebel. We are creating a grim future with our silence. And ironically, these false pastors will be the first to fall when judgment comes. And people like you and me, those who stood firm, will be left to pick up the pieces. And if that's the role he's called us to play, then so be it. Let it be for his glory. But if we could save the world from even an inkling of pain, right now is the time to do it. And speaking of painful, something truly painful to watch is Leslie Jones's angry black woman character, which she brings out whenever she goes irrelevant. This time, she's complaining about Elon Musk. Let's see what wonderful insight she has.
This is official shit! How is this guy firing people? If this guy gave me a pink slip, I'd give his ass a black eye.
So the so-called party of democracy and civility is once again cheering violence against their opponents. Let's tally that up. Democrats have attempted to assassinate Trump twice, mocked him after he survived, spent the better part of the year vandalizing Teslas, firebombing dealerships, and now they're on national television on what they still have the nerve to call comedy, fantasizing about assaulting Elon Musk for firing people. I'm going to need AOC to circle back and explain how this isn't a threat to democracy, because at this point, they're not slow walking us into civil war anymore. They're speed running the map they drew themselves. Now, let's break this down. When Leslie Jones said she'd punch Elon Musk for handing out pink slips and the crowd roars, it's not just a joke, it's a cultural signal. It's the normalization of violence cloaked in punchlines. It's one thing for a frustrated worker to complain about layoffs. It's another for a multi-millionaire celebrity with the protection of the media class and the backing of a partisan audience to publicly call for violence against someone who dared to disrupt their ideological monopoly. Because that's what the reality is. Musk didn't just buy a social media platform. He broke their algorithm chokehold, and then he started Doge and broke their corruption chokehold. He laid off the activists disguised as engineers and bureaucrats, and for that, the left treats him like a war criminal. This is how the cultural machine works now. Emotional license, institutional protection, and ideological double standards. If a conservative said even half of what Leslie Jones just did about, say, Jeff Bezos or George Soros, they'd be banned, blacklisted, and slandered as an inciter of political violence. But when the mob wants blood from the wrong kind of billionaire, one who won't bow to ESG scores or DEI bureaucrats, it's fair game. Threats become punchlines, rage becomes applause. Now, what we're seeing is the collapse of political restraint. The left isn't even interested in persuasion anymore. They want submission. And when they don't get it, they reach for the torch, the brick, or the mic, because that's the order now. First they mock, then they shame, then they vandalize. And if none of that works, they escalate. This isn't new. It's just more exposed. The same institutions that told us that Trump's tweets were violence now clap for celebrities who joke about committing actual violence. And the real danger here isn't just in what's said, it's in what's allowed, because when the threats against Musk are met with cheers and actual violence against conservatives is met with media silence, you're witnessing the formation of a two-tiered moral code, one for the regime's allies and one for everyone else. And that double standard doesn't just breed cynicism, it breeds backlash. If people feel that the system no longer protects them, or worse, actively targets them, then eventually they stop playing by the rules. That's the most ironic part. The people screaming about saving democracy are the ones accelerating its breakdown. You can't have a free society when one side is immune to consequence and the other is punished for existing. You can't preach tolerance while fantasizing about assault. You can't run a nation on threats, lies, and laughs, because at the end of the day, when the mask slips and the punchlines become prophecy, the crowd might laugh, but our country's going to bleed. And speaking of trying to make our country bleed, Ayanna Pressley and a few other activists are really pushing for reparations. Here's what they had to say.
Discrimination against black people. We are in a moment of anti-blackness on steroids, and we refuse to be silent. We will not back down in our pursuit of racial justice. The antidote to anti-blackness is to be pro-black, and we will do it unapologetically. The United States government owes us a debt, and we need reparations now.
Let me make this absolutely crystal clear. America owes you nothing. Zero. Nada. Zilch. Zip. Reparations were already paid in the blood of over 360,000 Union soldiers who died fighting to end slavery. And in the original reparations, Republican President Abraham Lincoln authorized in 1865. 40 acres and a mule. That land was seized from Democrat plantation owners and redistributed to free slaves under the Special Field Order number 15. You know what happened to that? Democrats took it back. After Lincoln's assassination, Southern Democrat Andrew Johnson became president and overturned the order, returning the land to former slaveholders. And let's not pretend the party changed overnight. Those same Southern Democrats, the Dixiecrats, were still part of the Democrat caucus well into the 20th century. Some, like Senator Robert Byrd, served until 2010. So when Representative Ayanna Pressley wants to talk about who owes who, how about she just start with our own party first? This is the game now. Weaponize history, erase context, and use grievance as a form of political leverage. When Pressley says the U.S. owes her reparations now, she's not talking about justice. She's talking about power. She's trying to rewrite the moral ledger of America to keep the left's perpetual guilt machine running. Because without it, they have nothing. No vision, no unity, no solutions, just an ever-growing list of demands and a refusal to acknowledge the progress that's actually been made. This narrative that we're in some kind of new anti-blackness on steroids crisis is not only factually bankrupt, it's morally corrosive. America elected a black president twice. We have black billionaires, black mayors, black CEOs, black media empires, black members of Congress, including her, who literally run committees. And yet we're supposed to believe this is worse than Jim Crow? Worse than slavery? Come on, spare us. I know most of you think we're dumb, but we're not. The only thing on steroids is the victimhood industry, and it's getting fat off the vision. Now, the broader implication here is the left cannot survive without a permanent underclass. That's why they constantly push identity over individuality. They don't want black Americans to be free. They want them to be dependent. Dependent on government handouts, dependent on racial grievance, dependent on the Democrat Party to save them from the very systems the left helped build. It's a toxic feedback loop, and Pressley's rhetoric is just another injection of poison into a culture already overdosing on resentment. And what's all of that going to do for our national unity? Because we all know reparations won't heal. They'll divide us further. You cannot build a shared future by constantly demanding repayment for a past no living person participated in. What you're doing is stoking intergenerational guilt and tribal warfare. You're telling millions of Americans who never owned slaves, whose ancestors may have come here long after slavery ended, or who may be descendants of abolitionists, that they owe a debt simply for existing in the wrong skin. That's not justice. That's racialized extortion dressed in moral drag. And the real kicker, Presley and her ilk have no plan, just vague demands and hashtags. How much are reparations supposed to be? Who qualifies? Do Nigerian immigrants get paid? What about mixed race Americans? Do you pay people who've never been enslaved by a country that no longer allows slavery with money taken from people who never owned slaves? It's not just unworkable, it's intellectually bankrupt. But this is the moment we're in, folks. A time where performative outrage has replaced civic duty, where historical nuance is sacrificed for political theater, and where people like Representative Ayanna Pressley can stand on the graves of their ancestors and demand payment for suffering they never experienced, while ignoring the sacrifices others made to give them the very microphone they now use to denounce the country that made their platform possible. So no, America doesn't owe you anything. If anything, you owe America some gratitude. You owe the soldiers who bled and died to end slavery. You owe the civil rights heroes who fought for equal opportunity, not equal outcomes. And above all, you owe the truth to your constituents, to history, and to a future that doesn't revolve around inherited outrage, but earned respect. But say with me, folks, it gets worse, because in enters Representative Lee Summers, who amazingly enough has less ideas and less of a plan on how to implement these so-called reparations.
A duty to repair. So let's make it clear. There is a debt that does exist. This country has taken so much from black folks and has a debt it owes because for over 400 years into this very day, this country has stolen black labor, black lives, black futures. Industries were built and maintained through the subjugation of black people in this country, and wealth was built and maintained through the discriminatory policies that still plague us to this day. And to be clear, some people directly benefited from it or are direct beneficiaries of it. We have systems that create and perpetuate imbalances and balances in our society, and you either benefit from it or you are disenfranchised by it. And black people continue to be disenfranchised and harmed by these systems. Others receive advantages from it. So it's a duty to repair. So
watching these two ladies speak back to back is like watching students who copied each other's homework. Zero originality of thought, just the same regurgitated black liberation rhetoric dressed up in emotional buzzwords and recycled grievance. It's not a policy argument, it's a guilt trip. And if this kind of rhetoric goes unchecked, it's going to drive us headfirst into the same chaos currently unraveling in South Africa. Racial revenge politics, collapsing infrastructure, and an economy cannibalized by identity quotas instead of merit. So let's be real about what's happening here. House Democrats are introducing a multi-trillion-dollar reparations bill, not as a symbolic gesture, but as a full-blown wealth transfer aimed at closing the so-called racial wealth gap. They framed it as a duty to repair, but what they're really doing is trying to nationalize guilt and monetize history. This isn't justice, it's redistribution by bloodline. It's the idea that you owe someone money, not for what you did, but for who you are. And it's not just historically dishonest, it's morally bankrupt. Representative Summers says America stole black labor and continues to steal black futures. That's not an argument, that's a slogan. What they won't tell you is that America also created unprecedented opportunity, including for black Americans who, despite real historic injustice, have risen to some of the highest offices in the land, started billion-dollar companies, dominated pop culture, sports, politics, and media. If systemic oppression is still this powerful, then it must be the first system in history to allow the oppressed to run the very institutions they claim are stacked against them. Now, do disparities exist? Of course. Like with any system, there are going to be flaws, but correlation is not causation. The racial wealth gap isn't just about the legacy of slavery. It's about policy, culture, education, family breakdown, and a welfare state that incentivizes dependence over discipline. And let's not forget, every American is struggling under inflation, economic instability, and decades of political mismanagement under Democrats. But only one group is being told they deserve a $1 trillion payout, not for what they do, but for their skin color. This isn't just bad economics, it's social sabotage, because once you start assigning collective blame and collective reward based on skin color, you don't get justice, you get division. You don't repair a nation by teaching one generation to feel entitled and another to feel ashamed. That's how you rot a society from the inside out. And make no mistake, this kind of thinking isn't coming from the fringe anymore. It's being echoed in schools, corporate boardrooms, and government committees. It's the logical endpoint of a decades-long project. Replace equal opportunity with equity, merit with identity, and gratitude with grievance. This reparations bill is just the latest phase, a political Hail Mary meant to buy loyalty, distract from failure, and solidify permanent racial blocks within the Democrat Party. But here's the truth. You can't fix the future by punishing the present for the sins of the past. You can't build unity on the foundation of inherited debt. And you sure as hell can't maintain a free country by handing out moral IOUs based on skin color. If we want to survive as a nation, we need to get back to what actually lifts people up. Strong families, earned success, that means merit, honest history, and a culture that rewards effort, not entitlement. Because once this Pandora's box is open, once you institutionalize reparations, there's no end to it. Every group will have a claim. Every identity will have a grievance. And America will be reduced to nothing more than a courtroom of competing victimhoods. And that's not justice. That's just straight up collapse. Roman Empire style collapse. Eating yourself from within. Is that what we want to see?
What does your resolution really aim for? Is it that Black Americans of a certain economic level, are they being targeted? Is it everyone? So basically, it doesn't matter as to what economic level. It's pretty much all Black Americans. What about those individuals of any race that have a lineage going back to slave America? It doesn't matter.
So to be very clear, whether or not a Black Black descendant of American chattel slavery were able to break into the middle class, they are still, and they were able to do that despite the harms, despite the past injustices done to them. So they are not excluded from the reparation and the remedies therein. When we think about who traces their lineage back, that is again a debate that is used to try to silence the rest of this movement. It's a distraction tactic because what we want to do is instead of focusing on again what the system did, who did it, and what the impact of it was, we'd rather get bogged down in, well, should they make $25 an hour or should they be paid below a living wage, right? Should they have been educated, or if they're educated, is that disqualified? No, they're Black. If they are Black and they're descendants of slaves, then they were directly in the lineage of harm. If they are descendant of Jim Crow policies in this country, they are the direct descendants and current living recipients of that harm. If they are living today, then we are still harmed by inequitable funding schemes of public schools. We're still harmed by being Black or brown or poor and living nearer to environmental hazards all over this country. If you are Black in this country right now, you are still less likely to be able to acquire a loan. The interest rates are still higher for Black folks who are attempting to buy homes or go to school. We are still discriminated because of our hair, because of our names, when we go to get jobs.
And now, folks, we've reached the final form of reparations ideology. It's not about slavery, not about Jim Crow, not about poverty, not even about measurable harm. It's about race, pure and simple. According to Representative Lee, Black millionaires who never experienced slavery, who were never denied schooling, who built wealth and status in the same America they claim is systematically rigged against them, those individuals are still owed reparations. Not because of what happened to them, but because of who they are, because of their skin color, because they're Black. That's the standard now. Reparations, in this view, aren't a remedy. They're a racial entitlement. This is no longer about historical justice. It's about embedding permanent grievance into law. What Summer Lee and others are arguing for is not restorative, it's revisionist. They want to transform America's concept of fairness from one based on individual merit and opportunity to one rooted in ancestral pain and racial hierarchy. And let's be clear, when you say that wealth, success, or education don't disqualify someone from receiving reparations, what you're really saying is that no condition disqualifies them. You're not compensating for disadvantage, you're canonizing identity. The deeper issue here isn't the absurdity of paying multimillionaires for injustice they never personally experienced. It's the worldview driving it. This is the fruit of decades of leftist doctrine that treats race not as a part of someone's story, but as their entire story. In that worldview, every outcome, no matter how complex, is reduced to racial disparity. Every Black success is viewed as an anomaly, every Black setback as a systemic failure, and every inequality as a moral debt someone else has to repay. And this is the trap of the modern reparations movement. It conflates harm with identity. It weaponizes history while severing it from responsibility. It refuses to acknowledge Black agency because doing so would challenge the narrative of permanent victimhood. And it doesn't stop with slavery. Summer Lee makes it clear, if you were affected by Jim Crow laws or even by modern disparity in loan rates, you are entitled, even if you prospered. Even if you've built a life and career with every freedom the system supposedly denied you. Now, what's more revealing is the strategic evasion. When asked about economic thresholds or actual lineage, Lee calls those questions a distraction tactic, but Those aren't distractions. They're the actual point. Reparations, if they're to be taken seriously at all, must be based on demonstrable harm. But that's exactly the discussion the left refuses to have because it exposes the real goal behind these initiatives. Redistribution based on race, not justice based on history. So let's connect the dots. This moment didn't appear out of nowhere. It's the result of institutional rot, of universities that teach grievance instead of civics, of media that rewards outrage instead of truth, of the Democrat Party treating division as a currency. This is what happens when identity becomes a central organizing principle of a nation. It no longer matters whether you're free, wealthy, or successful. If you're black, you're owed. If you're white, well, better get prepared to pay. But where does that all lead? Obviously not to healing, not to unity. It leads to resentment. It leads to a country where race becomes a scorecard, not a starting point, where history is not something to learn from, but something to exploit. And eventually, it leads to collapse because no nation can survive when its people are taught to distrust each other, blame each other, and owe each other based on things they didn't do. So let's call this for what it is, a racial entitlement program dressed in the language of leftist justice. It's not about repairing the past. It's about controlling the future, and the only way to stop it is to reject the lie that America's founding sin is its defining feature. We don't need more payouts. We need more truth. We don't need permanent reparations. We need permanent responsibility. That's the only path forward. Now on to the truly low IQ segment of the show. Here we have Bruce Springsteen having an absolute meltdown during a show in the UK. And this is what he had to say.
That won't bow down to their ideological demands.
God, shut up.
They're removing residents off American streets and without due process of law are deporting them to foreign detention centers and prisons. This is all happening now. A majority of our elected representatives have failed to protect the American people from the abuses of an unfit president and a rogue government. They have no concern or idea of what it means to be deeply American. The America that I've sung to you about for 50 years is real. And regardless of its faults, is a great country with a great people. So we'll survive this moment.
Why are you in the UK saying this? Imagine shelling out hundreds of dollars for a Bruce Springsteen concert only to be lectured about how awful America is in the UK, no less. Not exactly what Born in the USA fans signed up for, but this is what the modern cultural elite does. They hijack art, entertainment, and nostalgia to repackage it into therapy sessions for their political neurosis. Springsteen didn't just have a bad day and give a bad performance. He tried to give a full-blown emotional sermon, one rooted in delusion, moral confusion, and the tired idea that America is always on the verge of fascism unless a Democrat is in charge, which is ironic when you actually think about the dynamic between both parties. Now, when we look at what he actually said, he accused the United States of deporting people without due process, of running rogue detention centers, and of being governed by an unfit president, referring, of course, to Trump. He then has the audacity to claim that the real America he's sung about for 50 years still exists, just apparently not under the current administration. Translation, America is only great when it's run by his own tribe. Otherwise, it's a lawless dystopia. This isn't a critique of policy. It's just a moral tantrum. It's not rooted in facts. It's rooted in a broader cultural script where the left sees any pushback against open borders, crime, or bureaucratic overreach as totalitarianism. Springsteen is repeating the same tired rhetoric that's been normalized in academia, media, and late-night TV, that any enforcement of law, any expression of national interest is somehow a betrayal of American values. That is the narrative now. And it's being exported globally by celebrities who still believe they're folk heroes for the working class while selling $300 tickets to lecture middle-aged Brits on American politics. This moment reveals so much. First, it shows how detached the entertainment class has become from the people they claim to represent. Springsteen built his entire career on the image of the blue-collar, working-class American, but now stands before the global elite, denouncing the very nation those workers love. That's not rebellion, that's straight-up betrayal. Second, it shows how the left uses culture to smuggle in ideology. These are not one-off rants. They're part of a broader trend where everything from music to sports to children's programming, all of it is injected with political messaging. It's never just a concert anymore. It's an indoctrination session. You go in there to just hear this person have an emotional breakdown about what's ailing them, about the state of the country, just because those in power aren't people with the party that they like the most. And if you don't clap along, all of a sudden you're labeled a fascist. And third, this exposes the total moral asymmetry in our public discourse. Springsteen can accuse a sitting president of tyranny on a foreign stage and be praised for his bravery. But if a conservative artist expressed concern about Biden's border crisis or Kamala Harris's race-based rhetoric, they'd be canceled within a week. The double standard isn't just alive, it's the operating system. I mean, just look at what happened to Theo Von this past week. He's not even conservative. He's more of a moderate. And he went out to Qatar to go perform for the troops that are stationed out in the Middle East, and he opened for Trump. And what happened? The left canceled him because he took a photo with Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. The double standard is so unbelievably glaring, and the left will deny it up and down. They'll say that they don't cancel anybody for political affiliation, but at this point, we can all see through the gaslighting. It's obvious. And so here we are, folks. In a moment when artists who once captured the grit and resilience of everyday Americans now stand overseas condemning the very country that made their success possible. And why? Because their real loyalty isn't to Americans. It's to their party. It's to their party's narrative. The narrative that America is systemically broken, that conservatism is dangerous, and that salvation lies in technocratic globalism and progressive ideology. But let me tell you something Bruce forgot. America doesn't need saving by pop stars. It doesn't need moral lectures from millionaires who haven't stood in a DMV line in decades. What America needs is truth, courage, and people who still believe this country is worth fighting for. Not just singing about when it's politically convenient or when your pockets are getting full. If the left wants to know why they're losing the working class, this is it. Because nothing says we're out of touch quite like preaching to the choir in a foreign country about the nation you no longer understand. Anyway, President Trump responded to Springsteen's meltdown saying, "I see the highly overrated Bruce Springsteen goes to a foreign country to speak badly about the President of the United States. Never liked him, never liked his music or his radical left politics, and importantly, he's not a talented guy, just a pushy, obnoxious jerk who fervently supported crooked Joe Biden, a mentally incompetent fool and our worst ever president who came close to destroying our country. If I wasn't elected, it would have been gone by now. Sleepy Joe didn't have a clue as to what he was doing, but Springsteen is dumb as a rock and couldn't see what was going on. Or could he? Which is even worse. This dried out prune of a rocker, his skin is all atrophied, ought to keep his mouth shut until he gets back into the country. That's just standard fare. Then we'll all see how it goes for him." Now, needless to say, that's classic Trump. Blunt, unfiltered, and totally uninterested in playing nice with cultural elites. And whether you love it or hate it, you can't deny this. He's saying what a lot of Americans are thinking. People are tired of being talked down to by multimillionaire celebrities who made fortunes off the very country they now denounce from foreign stages. Springsteen wanted attention, and he got it. Just maybe not the kind he was hoping for. So ask yourself, how much of what you believe about this country is truly your own conviction? And how much has been spoon-fed by celebrities, media, and institutions that profit off your guilt and your silence? At what point do we stop letting the loudest, most entitled voices redefine patriotism as shame and justice as vengeance? The deeper question isn't just whether Bruce Springsteen has a right to say what he said. It's why his message lands so easily in a culture that's been trained to see America's flaws as fatal and its virtues as accidents. How long can a nation survive when its storytellers resent the very soil that made them? That's not just a cultural detour. It's a slow suicide. The next time someone preaches at you with a microphone instead of earning your respect, ask yourself, who benefits from your self-doubt? Because if they can rewrite the story, they can rewrite the future, and they're counting on you to never notice it. You tell me what you think in the comments down below. Have a terrific day. Peace.